Hello, and welcome back to another update. As I cover the latest developments throughout the front line, we start out with the general situation across the front line, where here, according to the latest information, the Russian forces is currently undergoing a offensive across the whole front line. This offensive is not one of those major offensives where we expect major advances, Russia running down and attacking Dnipro, Zaporizhia, Kharkiv, and so on. This is a small objective large-scale offensive. What they're doing is that they are trying to improve their positions across the whole front line. Of those is in the northern front, where they are fighting in the direction of Kupiansk, where they want to adapt the front line to match the Oskar River line. So they have been building up a lot of troops to match the front line with the Severodonetsk River here to the south, capturing Liman, and the Oskar River here to the north, capturing Kupiansk. These are the two objectives of the Russian offensive in the north. We then have an offensive here in the Bakhmut direction, which hasn't started yet. The Russian forces are here looking to gather enough forces here to push back the Ukrainian forces, both in the direction of Siversk, Chesev Yar, and to the north in the direction of Slovyansk. So they want to match the front line with the Severodonetsk River to the north and the Slovyansk to Konstantinivka line here in the west. As for the central part in the Donetsk direction, they here want to capture Avdiivka, Marinka, and Krasnoarivka. These three cities here in the Donetsk front, combined with Novomikhailivka and Uledar here to the south. So these 5 cities are a target in this Russian offensive. We've seen that there's no effort towards Uledar or Krasnoarivka, and there's slow advance in Marinka just as before. So this is as it has been, artillery drills in Uledar and Krasnoarivka, and slow fighting in Marinka. This here they are looking to capture Marinka and then focus on Krasnoarivka. There's been some fights here to the south of the city, but that's about it. Moving further south in the direction of the Zaporizhia front, the Russian forces here have the objective of essentially pushing the Ukrainian forces back beyond the main line of defense, and then establishing and recapturing some of the trenches they've lost throughout this Ukrainian offensive. So those are the different Russian objectives all throughout the front line. What we're seeing to be the focus right now is in the Donetsk front towards Avdiivka and Novomikhailivka, and in the northern parts in the direction of Kupiansk and Makiivka. All of these are to essentially create better positions for the Russian forces so that they can combine their forces elsewhere, which is these more open areas with hardly any fortifications and so on, where they can have a much in the Zaporizhia front. If the Russian forces capture Oryhiv, they would essentially have a defensive line going from the Dnieper River all the way to the east. So this is their optimal position for the Russian forces in the Zaporizhia front, having Oryhiv under their control. This is why before the Ukrainian offensive, they attempted to attack towards Oryhiv to capture Lobkove, Shiraki, and all the way up to Oryhiv, but they failed to do so, after which the Ukrainians launched their offensive and they managed to advance down to Ropotine and the first main line of defense. As for the Donetsk area, we see here that the cities of Avdiivka, Krasnoarivka, Marinka, Novomikhailivka, and Uledar are all ones that are heavily fortified by the front line. If the Russian forces capture all of these, they'll have a connection going all the way down from Uledar, going up through Novomikhailivka, Marinka, through Krasnoarivka, and up to Avdiivka. With that, they will have a complete wall to the west of Donetsk, leaving them in a safe position. And as we can see in this picture here, in the last 24 hours, there's been 0 Ukrainian artillery strikes on Donetsk. So with this offensive, they're already removing all of the artillery strikes on Donetsk from the Ukrainians. So they plan on continuing this offensive until they capture Avdiivka, similar to Bakhmut. If they manage to capture all of these 5 cities, if they manage to capture Oryhiv, if they manage to capture Kupiansk and Liman in the north, and finally launch an offensive here in the Bakhmut direction, capturing Chesev Yar, moving the front line to the Slovyansk-Konstantinivka line, they'll essentially have achieved the best possible defensive position in the local area. After this, they can begin thinking about a major offensive, because the current issue is that if the Russians redirect their forces from the south, they will not have enough forces to defend their current positions. They need as many men as they can get to hold back the Ukrainians. This is why the Ukrainians have been able to continue the offensive for 4 months, because despite their losses in this offensive, they still have enough forces to protect and defend their own country. So the Russian forces are unable to overwhelm the Ukrainian forces. They're just able to match them so far. And this is why we're seeing this major small objective offensive where they plan on capturing local objectives rather than strategic victory in the war. With this, they will be able to have a good negotiation point, after which they can probably get a good deal if the Ukrainians are willing to negotiate for peace. Otherwise, they would be able to hold position where they will have as much time as they want to build up as big an army as they want to launch a major offensive if they plan on doing that. What has happened locally over the past day, we have seen that the Ukrainian forces are facing a difficult time here across the Russian main line of defense. If we take a look at the positions map mode, we see that they have a few positions across the main line of defense, the anti-tank ditches and so on, and they have a foothold in the trenches to the east of that. The Russians are now counterattacking in this direction to try and push them out of the trenches and back over the anti-tank ditches. At the same time, they're also trying to create a buffer zone between the anti-tank ditches and the Ukrainian positions here to the south or to the east of Novoprokopivka. So there's some counteroffensive operations by the Russian forces here. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian forces are attacking west of Robotyne and to the southwest of Novodanilivka in the direction of Kopany, where they are trying to expand their control east and west of Robotyne. And reports just came out that the Russian forces actually managed to advance in two directions after the counterattacks here west of Verbove, both to the southwest of the village and to the northwest of the village, as the Russian forces are pushing the Ukrainians back in the direction of the main defensive line and away from the main defensive line here in the southwestern parts. So there's an increasing amount of Russian counterattacks in this direction. We then move on to the Novomykhailivka area, where the Russian forces have here managed to advance to the southwest and to the east of Novomykhailivka. They are clearly here trying to move in the direction of Novomykhailivka, trying to get a foothold to then push westwards, capturing the city and moving in the direction of Konstantinivka. So there's some fighting here in the direction of Novomykhailivka and small Russian advances. As for the northern parts in the direction of Marinka, there's been no changes. North in the direction of Vodiane, Pervomaiske, the Russian forces have managed to advance a slight bit further, increasing the gray zone between Vodiane and Pervomaiske, and some general fights within the northern parts of Pervomaiske, trying to cut off the Ukrainian forces here in this western part of Donetsk from Avdiivka, isolating them and expanding the front line. We also see some fighting in the direction of Severne, as well as to the east of Vodiane, where the Russian forces have managed to kick the Ukrainian forces out of the heights here in the area. As for the southern parts, there's been small advances and Russian forces managed to capture a trench here. And then there's some fighting over in the northern parts by the first lines and other trenches here to the south of the city. We've also seen that the Ukrainian forces launched a counterattack in the direction of the coke plant, and they managed to actually push the Russian forces off, leaving it as a gray zone. So the Ukrainians do not have control over it, but they managed to put the Russian forces off it. As for the northern parts of Krasnoyarivka, the Russian forces managed to capture the forest patches here to the north of the village. We then move on to the Bakhmut area, where the Ukrainian forces managed to advance further in the heights to the east of Klishivka and match the front line here to the railways. Finally, moving further north, we see in the direction of Makiivka, there's been some fighting here. There's been no advances by the Russian forces, but there's heavy fighting by Makiivka to the east of the Serebets River. And then in the northern parts, there's some fighting by Kislivka as well as Sinkivka, but again, there's no advances but heavy fighting in the area. And that is all for this update. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.